In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Oh yes, here we are, again another year. I remember I began here about a year ago. I remember I think my first sermon was the Transfiguration last year. So here we are again, Transfiguration Sunday. And the Gospel reading is the story of Jesus' Transfiguration. The Transfiguration is roughly the midpoint of Jesus' ministry on earth. He begins, of course, with his baptism and ends with his crucifixion. And about halfway through, Jesus goes up a mountain with three of his disciples, Peter, James, and John. And while they're up on that mountain, something extraordinary happens. The Gospel reading says, Jesus' face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And a moment later, the divine voice speaks, just as it did at Jesus' baptism. This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. And adding this time, listen to him. So what exactly is the Transfiguration? It's this strange, supernatural, inexplicable moment, this flash of glory, this glimpse of something divine. That's what's happening at Transfiguration. And Peter is singled out as having experienced this holy interaction with God, a holy moment. Jesus is transfigured before his very eyes. But what if this passage was about another transfiguration? The transfiguration of Peter and the transfiguration of us. Perhaps you might tend to think of Peter's moment, that holy moment, perhaps what happened to him 6 days earlier. If you recall, Peter, 6 days earlier, confessed that Jesus was indeed the Messiah. And then Jesus called him. Jesus nicknamed him the Rock. And he beckons Peter to build his church. But I wonder if Peter's real sense of call didn't happen so much then, but rather on that mountain, when that divine voice interrupts all of his plots and plans and reminds him to linger in the moment. Sorry, it's his plot and plan to linger in the moment, Peter's plot and plan. But the divine voice tells him instead not to erect tents, not to linger there, but to listen to Jesus. And that's the important thing. The one thing that Peter can do is not to carry on with his own schemes, not to take matters into his own hands. Yes, let's build a tent, let's stay. But simply to listen to this man, who is more than man. And in that moment, I think everything for Peter was still and clear and made sense. But of course, the moment didn't last, right? Peter had to be pulled up off the ground, literally. Perhaps he was wondering if anything actually had happened, or whether he'd imagined it all. And then they went down the mountain. And Jesus will again speak to him of his impending death and destiny. And Peter will struggle to listen, to follow, to be faithful. And actually, Peter does more than struggle, he fails, right? And Jesus will reach out and raise him up again and send him forth. And I have a hunch that each time Peter fell down and got up again, he would look back on this day and recall those words on the mountain, just listen to him. I had the privilege recently, this reminds me of a few weeks ago, I don't know if any of you have been to the Kerner Hall. Well, beautiful conservatory hall, concert hall, and I saw and heard a chorale, a musical chorale of about 20 men and women from Los Angeles. And they, for an hour and a half, without any musical accompaniment, through song and through movement, enacted Peter's betrayal of Christ. And so for an hour and a half, they peeled back the layers and they explored the effect that it had on Peter, his act of betraying Jesus when he said, "Oh, I don't know him 3 times before the cock crowed." And in part of the piece that was the most profound for me, they enacted through song and movement how each day, probably for the rest of Peter's life, he would wake up and hear a cock crow. And he would be reminded, he would be brought back to that time and that pain and that guilt of when he denied his Lord. But each day, when he went through that, hearing the cock crow and feeling the pain and remorse, and as he turned his face to his Lord, every day he received words of love and reconciliation and forgiveness and devotion from the one whom he betrayed. Very powerful image. So that sense of forgiveness and love and devotion from his Lord is what propelled Peter into his life, into his ministry. It moved him to the very core of his being. And he enabled him to love unreservedly and to endure suffering. And it's on that the church was built. It's what we all need, isn't it? To know that we are loved and known for exactly who we are, no matter what we do, no matter our failings, and deeply, deeply loved and forgiven by the one who created us. This transfiguration, this holy moment with God, is what we all desire in our hearts. And we try to get there by different means, I think, to capture a holy moment. We meditate. We build ourselves up. We look out for ourselves. We eat right. We work out physically. We care for our bodies. We care for one another, trying to be really good to our neighbors. We try to find meaning in life somehow. Or at the very least, we try to escape pain in whatever shape or form it appears to us, as we try somehow unconsciously to create holy moments in our lives. But most often, I think, we don't recognize that this urge to be the best that we can be, or the urge to escape pain, or to transcend it, is actually the call of God, the beckoning of God for us to be transfigured into his likeness, and to know that we are God's child, made in his image, and that he is well pleased with us. That's God's call. So once again, I'm standing in this pulpit talking to you this morning about a sense of call. God's call on our lives. And sometimes I think in the church, the notion of call, we usually think of that big call to the priesthood. And as I myself head towards ordination to the priesthood in about, I think, 6 days, 5 hours, and 17 minutes.
But who's counting?
Well, not that I'm counting. But call is at the forefront of my mind. Bishop Jenny called me into her office earlier this week for a chat, as she is wont to do with all the ordinands in her charge. And she encouraged me to recollect God's call on my life, and then to ponder the brevity of that, and the hard work to come after I respond. Excuse me, and the grace of God that will sustain me and pick me up when I fall. And that the foundation of my ministry, Bishop Jenny reminded me, will be in the act of divine listening. Just like Peter on that mountain. Listen to him. And my friends, God is calling all of us to the priesthood. The priesthood of all believers. A priest is set apart from this world, not grasping for all that glitters in this world in which we live. All of us are called, instead, to cling to God in times of prosperity and adversity. We're called not to judge others and cordon ourselves off into tribes, or to choose instead to share our wealth and to stand up for the weak and the lonely and the oppressed. We're called to love freely. And we're called to live in unity with one another, with our brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters who are different from us. And when the world responds, when they look at us, and they say, what is all that about? And then we point to Jesus. Bishop Jenny kept saying, you point to Jesus. That's what we're all called to do. And to view our failures as divine moments, listening and expecting our Lord to be powerfully present. My brothers and sisters, we are all being called to that royal priesthood. We are called to be transfigured, to work and to partner with God in our own transfiguration, and that of the whole world.
Amen.